Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BimTube Podcast. So in this episode, I'm very lucky and privileged to have Melissa Zanocco with me, OBE, who will be telling us about what she's been working on and where we can find more information, I hope. So we'll work that in towards the end. But Melissa, first of all, thank you, and thanks for your time for joining me.
Oh, no, thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. And so again, as we discussed just before we started, obviously the aim of these podcasts is to target people that maybe aren't from either engineering or digital. So we won't necessarily dwell on sort of any specific topics, but again, feel to introduce any topic as we go that you feel I'm not covering. So I'll put it out there. Interrupt me, in other words. So, but before we go on, please, if you could just introduce yourself and your background and how did you get to where you are today, please.
Okay. Yes. So my job role is head of programs for the infrastructure client group, and the way that we describe the infrastructure client group is to call it a homework sharing club, and also a bit of a therapy group. And I think it's quite a unique setup. I haven't come across other things like it. So what we bring together the leading economic infrastructure clients in the UK. And bring them together under different sort of topic areas. So first of all, we bring together the CEOs to share their experience, and then we have things like there's a digital group. So we have we bring together the chief data officers, and that's in the digital transformation task group. We bring together sort of the equivalent of chief sustainability officers in the carbon group, and then we have also something called Project 13, which is about sort of generally how we deliver infrastructure. And then there are other groups like around people and productivity. And so my role when I'm head of programs, that's the program, and I sit over that there, and I bring them together. And really what my job is, the way you could describe it, is to say that I create safe spaces of trust where people can share their mistakes. And that's why I was saying, as well as their best practice, by the way, from a positive angle, as well as their best practice. But that's why I think it's quite rare. And I think it's especially for the economic infrastructure clients, because they're not in competition with each other. So Network Rail isn't in competition with Anglian Water, which isn't in competition with Sellafield, etc. And so, so they come together, and they firstly, if they share the mistakes, as I say, that saves the others, so they don't all have to make the same mistake. And on their journey, what they kind of started half empty like that with the mistakes, and on the journey over sort of 10 to 12 years, they suddenly said, oh, we could actually share our best practice. And then they kind of thought, oh, and we're quite important as the clients, and everyone, sort of the supplier ecosystem has to do a lot of what we say. So actually, we could actually transform the industry if we were all consistent. And so its three focus areas are what's focus. So one of the focus areas is that we need to focus on only the things that only clients need to lead on, and only those things that will transform the industry. And then benchmarking, so that we get that consistency, as I say, for the supplier ecosystem. And then on the share and adopt bit, which is the homework sharing club. And as I say, I think that's one of the most unique bits of it. We don't produce things. So there's lots of others out there who are doing toolkits and guidance notes and providing documents. We're the opposite. We're looking at all those things that say also that government provide, and helping them to adopt and embed them. So it's really that change process bit, which is that it's useful, the actual thing, but the most important bit is then embedding that into the culture. It's about people. And so, shall I pause, or shall I go into how did I get into that?
No, you
the
please.
Other half of the question.
I'm making notes. No. So please. So thank you. What I will do is say thank you in the pause. So thank you. No, that's really helpful. And I was curious about the three elements of the logo. So now I know why it's got the three. Okay. So please, and your background, if you would, that'd be great.
Yeah. So how did I end up there? So it's very interesting, actually. So I don't have a background in digital, and it really was through people, which I think is fitting, because the mantra of the our digital group we call the DTTG, which is the Digital Transformation Task Group. So I might use that, if it's all right to use an acronym rather than keep saying Digital Transformation Task Group.
Oh, yeah.
So the DTTG, the mantra is that it's all about people. So it's not about the tech. Tech is important, but it's really about the people. So for me, it's fitting that I came into digital through people. And it only really started about 4 years ago. So I got involved with the ICG 4 years ago. And the reason that I got involved is because I was attracted to people to get involved. So it's like a light. The way I describe the ICG, it's like a light on the hill. And I was one of those people that, like the moth, kind of got attracted to it. And there's some really amazing people that are working there, and they see the world differently, and they have a vision of the world and the way that it could be, and just see things from a certain angle. And they just hooked me. And I was like, yes, I want to be part of this. So I took it was quite a wild jump to get involved. And then for my first year, definitely with the digital group, I don't think I really spoke. I just was like a sponge, and I just sat there and I was just listening like mad. And as I say, really amazing people in that group, and very amazing as well, because I think it's quite tough to be a chief data officer and to be in digital, because I think that they're not understood. And I think that we've actually got a workshop coming up on resilience, and it feels like they're saying the same thing over and over again. No one's really listening to them, and then finally it sort of happens, and it takes a while. But they're so passionate, and what they're trying to do is they are trying to change the world. So it was really amazing. And then slowly, I started to kind of pick it up and understand what they were talking about. And then they've been on a journey. That group, we've been on a journey together. So and we'll probably cover that. I don't know if you want to go to that right now, or we'll cover that under a different question.
Please, no, whatever's in your mind, please go ahead. Okay. Tell me. No, it's about your journey. So yeah, if it's pertinent now, please do.
Yeah. Okay, well, so because the journey that I would say that the digital transformation task group's been on is at the beginning, we didn't even really mention the word digital twin. It was just starting to come up, and we thought it might be a bit of a buzzword or a fad or something like that, and probably a bit of suspicion in there. And then we kind of went through to actually realizing that digital twins, for me, are going to be some of the things that transform the industry and solve some of our global problems. And then realizing that the sort of systemic global issues, it will be connected digital twins. They will be the key enabler for resolving them. So kind of going, and that's over quite a short period of like 2 to 3 years of sort of not having hardly heard of them, to sort of thinking that these really are the answer to a lot of the issues. But then the latest bit of the journey is that actually it's about information and data. And it's about, we've sort of always been on the journey that it's the right people having the right information at the right time to make better decisions, leading to better outcomes. So we've always sort of had that. But that understanding that the digital twins that everybody's talking about and that are the answer to everything, actually underneath them is information and data, and how does that information and data get to the right people? That's been a real eye opener. And so things like very unsexy things like digital operating models or common data environments, and as I say, terms as well that I hadn't heard of before and didn't know what they were. It's actually realizing that they're at the bottom of all of this. They're like the foundations, and you can't have your kind of sexy digital twin on the top if you don't have those things in place. And it's quite hard to get investment. Going back to these poor, hard done by chief data officers, it's quite hard to get investment in those areas. So that's the journey that I've been on with them.
Great.
And what the end of the journey is that, because as I said, because I do the other areas as well. So I do Project 13 is a new delivery model. So that's what I would describe as creating the enabling environment. So as I say, if digital, it kind of is enabling the outcomes, you need to be able to exploit the digital to the full. So a Project 13 enterprise model for delivery allows you to exploit the digital. But this is where the carbon comes in, and suddenly those connected digital twins I was talking about, it really feels like that we won't be able to hit our net zero targets if we don't deliver differently and we don't exploit digital to the full. And so you start to see how it all fits together in the overall sort of picture. And that's the journey that I've been on with them over the last few years.
Great, thank you, and thank you. So there's lots of threads we could pull on there in the overview. So thank you. So so thank you very much indeed. Bearing in mind the the audience may be people that are completely familiar to some of these terms, and although they can obviously look them up, just very briefly, what is a digital twin? If someone
What is it?
just briefly,
No, that's fine, and I'll put it in my.
Yeah.
As I say, if I always feel like if I can get it and I can explain it, then
Yeah.
anyone can. So
Sure.
I'll put it in my simple way.
Please.
might not be a technical explanation, but no, for me, it's that. So in the past, you might have heard of things like BIM models, or people can sort of understand the idea on a computer screen of a model. And so I think a lot of people think that a digital twin is this a 3D model, and we have talked about a national digital twin, and I think literally people thought there was going to be this digital twin of the whole of the country with everything in it. But actually, it's way simpler, what I just said about the data. It's literally about having the data and the information about the thing. So you've got a physical thing, and then you've got all the information and data about that physical thing. But that's still not a digital twin. That's still just data and information. And what makes it different from, say, a BIM model or any kind of static model are the interventions. So it's the movement. It's that as the asset changes, the data and the information changes, if you need it to, it would be in real time, but it doesn't have to be. So it's in the time that's needed for whatever decision it is that you need to make or intervention you need to make, and then it's going the other way. It's that you then make better interventions based on the data that you've got. So the difference between, say, a model and a digital twin is that live, the movement of the updating of the data and using it to make the better decisions.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And that feedback loop is absolutely critical. And again, because I am a information management background, that's what was missing for sure. You'd survey things and you'd go around, and it was in, depending where people sat in whatever organization, it was probably in some people's benefit for things to be surveyed again. I mean, anyway, so it's really important. So thank you for that. And obviously I'll link to some of the obvious places people can find more information. We'll get on to where people we can wayfind people to at the end. But if you could just elaborate, if you don't mind, just on Project 13. I know you mentioned it several times, and I know there's a website that people can go to now. But can you just explain a little bit more about what it is and what the outcomes have been, please? I know you touched on it, but just a little bit more, please.
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah. And also that flows on very well from what you just said about how in the past it might have been somebody did a sort of static model at some point, and then it got stuck in that part, and then when you go into the operation and maintenance, they're not using that, and there's such a waste, and that sort of leads nicely into Project 13, because Project 13 is an enterprise delivery model, but if I actually just take a step back, because we haven't yet, I can't believe we've got this far and we haven't talked about outcomes yet, so we have to talk about outcomes.
Okay.
Why are we here? Why are we doing all this? What is the point? Because all of those areas that I talked about, they're all just enablers, but we haven't talked about what the enablers are for. So if I just sort of take a step out, although Project 13, funnily enough, was probably the lead into this, and it was first, but I'm almost going to put it last now, but because it's an outcome focused model. But if we look at the UK and its kind of journey on focusing on outcomes in infrastructure, then I think it start with, say, the construction playbook, and it very much focuses on outcomes and long-term sustainable relationships, which are and it references Project 13. And then last year, which I'm sure we'll talk about more, there was our vision for the built environment. And it says that the explicit purpose of the built environment is to enable people and nature to flourish together for generations. And that seems like such an obvious statement to make, and possibly for other industries it would be a really obvious thing to say, but it wasn't. So at the moment, in the built environment, often we're building stuff, we're putting up walls and creating buildings and assets and things, rather than thinking about that actually those buildings and assets are going to be used by people for a purpose, and that purpose should be to make their lives better and to help sort of nature to flourish, because it's only if nature flourishes that we flourish. So they're not building in that way at the moment. So then if you take the construction playbook and our vision for the built environment, and then they were both translated into policy in transforming infrastructure performance, but from the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, and that sort of took the ideas from there, and built on our vision for the built environment that talks about seeing the built environment as a system of systems, And what we mean by that is that I just talked about buildings and assets and things. If you're building a hospital, then obviously it needs the transport to get there. But at the moment we don't, and also like the parking there and the etc. there as well. And we don't think about that at the moment. So as I say, we sort of build a hospital and we think about the walls and we don't think about the healthcare inside it. But also we don't think about sort of all the methods, how are the people going to get there, and how are the people that want to visit them going to, and all that kind of thing. And then there's also nature involved in that, because we know that people heal faster if they're in nature, and so there's all those kind of elements to it. But we don't think like that. We think about building the hospital or doing the transport, or about sort of nature. And so it's saying that really we need to look at economic infrastructure, which is the things like the energy, like the transport, etc. The social infrastructure, which is the things like the schools, the prisons, the hospitals, the housing, and they're actually inextricably linked. And then we need to see that they sit in nature, and nature itself has got its own systems that sort of they all operate, and they're all inextricably linked. And now we've got digital systems as well, and that's kind of creating a fourth dimension to the system of systems. So it's first of all to recognize that, and this is very relevant for Project 13. I am going to get there. And then to sort of say, well, that's actually it's the services from that system of systems. So as I say, it's the healthcare, or it's the shelter, or the the mobility that it gives us. That's what we want. And why do we need those services? It's to improve people's lives. And then with the outcomes, there's outcomes at kind of a global level. So those better outcomes that can be like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Then there's like the national level, where we've got things like net zero by 2050. Then we've got local community level outcomes, which would say with the hospital would be a healthier community. And then you've got the actual investment in the project or program. And as I say, in this instance, it might be building a hospital. So where Project 13 comes in, and what was very strong in transforming infrastructure performance, is that first of all, you need to work out what is this outcome that we want that will make people and nature flourish, and then you kind of work back from that. And in TIP, it was suggesting that you look first at the system of systems that's there, and you say, can I just optimize what's already here and get that outcome? And that involves not building anything. So that's great for carbon. So you start to see it's all linked together. So that actually helps you with your carbon if you don't build something. And it's also very productive and cost efficient as well to not build something. But you might have to. So can you modify things that are already there? And then the final one is, do you need to build something new? And then if you build something new, you build it as an intervention on the overall system of systems. So you don't look at it as just building some, the walls or whatever the asset is, the thing. You look at this is the system of systems. I'm adding this to it. How does it fit in? So Project 13, finally coming to Project 13, is that's where and I've talked about how everything we do is like a change program, and it's like an industry change movement. So we actually use different language. So we don't talk about a client and supply chain, because that has that parent-child feel to it, and a transactional feel to it. And it feels like that the parent just tells the child what to do and then tells them off if they don't do it. So we talk about clients as capable owners. And what's the difference in a sense between a client and a capable owner is that a capable owner articulates those outcomes for people and nature, and that's their starting point. The starting point for everything is those outcomes, and their outcomes run as a golden thread through everything that happens in the enterprise. So they articulate that. Then they also articulate the value of it and not the cost of it, which is very different again. So they don't come with a solution and say, we've decided this is the best solution, and who can do this for the lowest price. They say, this is the outcome we're trying to achieve. What is the best way for us to achieve it? And then there's an integrator role, and the integrator will go in and sort of they liaise with the supplier ecosystem and say, what's the best way that we can do this? And so, as I say, it's an outcomes focused model, and the integrator, they'll be incentivized on the outcomes. So they're incentivized to find solutions. They're sort of procured for the capability to find the solutions. And in these really difficult times now, with all the problems that we're facing, that's so flexible compared to sort of fixed price, all other kinds of models there are out there, where now with all the things that we've been hit with, what they've really got is a solution finding bunch of capabilities that are all there to say, right, this is what the issue is now. How do we resolve that? And then and then they work with the rest of the supplier ecosystem. So what it can mean is that if there's somebody lower down in the supplier ecosystem that's particularly like with a digital solution, they could be part of the solution now, whereas before they were kind of lost in tier 4 or 5, or you might not have heard from them. And the same with things like the materials. When we talk about carbon, like things like decarbonised concrete and things, again, those peoples would have been on the outskirts, and now they can have much more of a say on finding the solution, sort of much more at the centre.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That gives me a clear idea of the alignment. You mentioned value, so thank you very much. How, and I guess there'll be different ways, so I'm intentionally asking this question to see what we discussed, but how do we measure value? So we talked about outcomes. You mentioned value. What does value mean, I guess, to you, but also to people in Project 13? How do we measure that? Because that comes, and just to give the context for people listening or watching, a lot of my background is things like ISO 55000. Again, that's another specialism, but strategic asset management. We talk about value. So how do you in Project 13 talk about value? How is that measured?
Yes, well, it's not only on cost, I think, is the first thing to say. So it's trying to measure what the value is for people and nature, as opposed to just what the cost is for the client in that particular instance. But I don't want it to sound like it's not competitive, because, as I say, it is when you're working to find the best solution, they are still a lot of the time they end up being more productive. They're not doing something, not building something, not doing whatever. So actually it ends up being sort of value for money as well. So I don't want to make it sound like that, it's sort of out the window, it's not important. But yeah, there's lots of other things, and each of them will do that themselves. So Project 13 doesn't prescribe, but there will be, I talked about the community elements of it. We've talked about the carbon elements of it. There's lots of all the different areas, and what they need to do is kind of almost work out the trade-offs. But what's different, I think, about Project 13 is the incentives will be around all of them, and they'll be agreed at the beginning, and they'll run through everything, and everyone will be incentivized around them. So they'll work out what the percentage is for each of them. And in the high performing enterprises, the supplier ecosystem will be engaged in working that out as well. So they'll kind of agree it together.
Right. So it's case by case in that way, and then they're weighted with a percentage, which you said, okay, right, yeah. Because when speaking with other people in this podcast or just in my day job, it's often this value. How do we measure value? But you're saying it's a process. Here are some examples, and that the client, the capable client, so let me get the rank, is leading that process, which is absolutely critical. So I think that is really useful. Thank you. I mean, I just on that alone, I could speak hours, but because you've also mentioned UN sustainability development goals, as obviously, they sometimes don't make a showing when maybe they should do. But again, if there is this alignment, then obviously they're there, aren't they, at some point at a higher level. What will I ask you? Wow, we've covered so much already. Where do I focus? If I'll completely change gear, because I could drill down on that topic for a long time, but completely changing the gear, just a straight out question: where do you think the skills gaps are generally? So it doesn't have to just be Project 13, but just generally as a very broad sort of brush statement, and it may be the obvious ones for us, but where do you see skills gaps in actually implementing all of the things that we're talking about? And I won't put words in your mouth, but I'll just see what you say there.
It's a great question, and I think that again, so I've talked about the national picture and the sort of the move towards outcomes, and I've talked about how they all sort of enable each other. So if I just sort of talk about that, because I think people sit underneath all of that. So what I mentioned, you've got sort of delivering differently, and then you've got the digital, and then you've got carbon, and then underpinning all of that is people, because if they don't have the right tools, skills, and capability, then you aren't going to be able to move forward to achieve those outcomes. But I think it's across everything. So it's I think the trouble is that we look at skills and capabilities in quite a siloed way, in the way that we do with everything else. So as I say, that normally you're a digital expert, or you're a carbon expert, or you might be a sort of procurement expert, or something around Project 13, capital delivery expert. And what I'm saying is that actually they all enable each other, and in each of those areas they're all saying we don't have people with the skills. But what if we're saying that what digital transformation means is that every person having the right information at the right time to make better decisions, then that actually means that every person needs to sort of have those skills. So I think it's about bringing the your employees along with you, and kind of making them all literate, as opposed to necessarily siloing it and thinking, oh, it's the people in the IT team or in the MIS team, or whatever you've called it, information management team, and they need specialist skills, and it's the people in the sustainability team, or what you called the net zero team, and they need. I think it's also about just making sure that all of the employees have got that grasp of so that they can do their job. So it's however much they need to be able to do their job. So they don't all need to be upskilled. But I think that's a really important point, and it's one that we in the digital transformation task group, we do a survey every year to see how digital transformation is moving forward. And the survey, we try to ensure that it goes to a wide number of people in the organisation, because even if you have a digital transformation strategy, let's say, but if we do the survey and the graduates respond and they're not aware of it, how effective is it being? So it's kind of getting that two views of it. There's one is the having it, but then the other is it embedded and adopted? As I said to you, that's what we help with, is the embedding and the adopting. And do the people on the front line have the information that they need in the format that they need it in order to be making better decisions? And if they're not, then it's great to have your strategy, but that's the link. And the results of this year's digital transformation strategy was that survey was identified two gaps, really telling an important gap. So the first one was that the board is starting to recognise that they need to invest in digital, but we're not yet unlocking that investment. And as I said, now that we have this really clear understanding that actually it's the data and the information that's going to solve a lot of these problems, that's really, really critical that we unlock that. So what we think is the gap that needs to be filled is articulation of benefits. And then going the other way is the gap between, there is more data now, but it's not getting through to the people that need it. So the sense-making, decision-making has gone down, but the data available has gone up. So that's when I was talking about things like common data environments and digital operating models. But that's why I think that every single person in the organisation needs to get upskilled to a certain point. Because otherwise there's no point having the increase in the data and the information or the digital twins or whatever it is, if that data isn't then getting through to the person that then makes a decision, which leads to the intervention. And there's organisations like, for example, Environment Agency, particularly during COVID, when everybody suddenly had to be on Teams and all that kind of thing. Because by digital, we mean things like being able to use Teams, because that can exclude, if they don't have access to Teams, or they're not very good at using it, or they don't feel comfortable with using it. That obviously had a massive impact during COVID. So that's what I mean by a very basic level. I'm not talking about that they all need to understand, the top level, but it's just making sure that every employee has got that basic understanding.
Yeah, thank you for that, because it makes me think about the different layers as well, because you've mentioned CDOs, or chief data officers, or maybe chief digital officers in some companies, or both. And of course, they are becoming more prevalent, and I'm seeing them particularly in central government, which is great. But you're right. Is it all joined up at every level and layer, and does it? And I think that the parallel for me conceptually, and often, is things like health and safety, right? So you need some people. We're talking about data and digital here. Some people are experts in their field, and other people, they need to know enough, and it needs to be part of their day job. I mean, I know I'm just paraphrasing what you say, but I'll often use that as a sort of conceptual parallel to say, well, does everybody need to be able to quote health and safety legislation? No, but does it need to be part of their day job, and do they need to know enough? Absolutely, it's pervasive, and I think we're slowly getting there. Again, I don't want to spend too long on that, but just what do you think the one single thing that a company, so it could be commercial, or obviously we're often implying the government, but say a commercial company within the supply chain that's new to these things, what one thing, or the main thing, the first thing they should start to sort of move towards a more digital environment? What, I know there's probably 100 things, but what's the single thing they always forget about? Is there anything you would say they should look at?
Yeah, so to go backwards, having just said, well, the strategy's not worth anything if the people aren't doing it, to go back and say, but you do need to have the strategy. So when I said that the infrastructure client group, it's got its 3 foundations, and the first pillar is focus. And that's what we've honed in on, is having an enterprise digital transformation strategy. And the reason it's an enterprise one is because it's for the whole of your supplier ecosystem. So obviously, depending, that will be the same for someone in the supplier ecosystem, but it depends where they sit. So the higher up they are, they'll have their own supplier ecosystem. Obviously the client's kind of the top one that's got the biggest one, but they will each have ones that sit beneath them and that they work with. And so what's so important is that it's important to have your own digital transformation strategy, but it needs to apply to the whole of the supplier ecosystem because of what we were talking about, the flow of information and data. So you need to understand, in Project 13, it's in the enterprise. It's like, how does the data and information flow across and up and down it? Who's going to own the data? When we're going back to those models that trapped at the start somewhere, not being used because they're owned by someone and they're sitting on someone's computer. What's the point of that? So it's being upfront at the beginning, so that when you're procuring, or anyone that you're dealing with knows what the situation is, and you've agreed how the information data is going to be shared and stored, and all the rest of that. But the other point about the enterprise digital transformation strategy is that it's an overarching document that pulls together all the different parts. So we've touched on some of them. So some people have a BIM strategy or plan. Some people have a digital twin strategy or plan. Most people have an information management strategy or plan. Most people have an IT strategy and plan. Then you'll have a skills one, and I could probably go on. There's probably all of them. The idea of the overarching strategy is that you just make sure that they're all convenient, they're all looking in the same direction and they're all enabling each other rather than all just going off and doing their own thing. And then critically, that they're enabling your business objectives. So when I was starting off saying it's not about digital, the end is not digital. So the focus of your digital strategy is not digital. The focus of your digital strategy is achieving your business objectives. And that goes back to the gap between unlocking the investment. Maybe it's, if we talk about common data environments and digital operating models, we don't get the investment. But if we talk about, this is the thing that the organization wants to achieve, and this is what you need to achieve it, then maybe that would be better. So sometimes they say they're not chief data officers, they're chief translation officers. And what they're doing is translating digital talk into board talk or business talk in ways that people can understand. And I think that's an area that ICT helps with as well. But I think it's also a responsibility, because if we're not unlocking the investment, yes, we can rail a little bit against people and say, oh, they don't understand or they're not listening. But also maybe we need to find the right words to say it, so that they do listen and they understand and they say, oh, why didn't you just say that?
I completely agree. There's a lot of activity with sort of classification. I'm desperate to say things like semantics, but at a data level, and of course that's more, traditionally more my day job, so I love all that stuff about mapping data model. But at some level, I was going to say, at some level, people miss exactly what you've just said. Is like, what does it mean? Or is a bridge a bridge? Is an embankment? I mean, London Underground and Network Rail, it's only recently we can agree what embankments are. I mean, this is, so again, it's really obvious things that have just persisted outside of the pure data domain. And then when large organizations like large infrastructure have introduced technology, with sort of distilled the challenges, haven't we? Where things, I know all this is just for the audience to listen about, things are done more regionally. I mean, this is maybe obvious, but you introduce a big, say, database and a large infrastructure organization, suddenly everything needs to be nationally consistent, and it just hasn't been. So So it's sort of highlighting, digital is often highlighting other challenges, aren't they? Which are process, you're talking about communication. I completely, have you got any examples? Again, maybe you don't want to name companies of where people have improved their business process, or are there any case studies that people, I'm sure you've got hundreds, but is there one notable example where people could, that we could
Well, a
share?
really big one, a massive one, is that National Highways, they did a valuation of their data, and they discovered that it was worth 6 billion, and their physical assets are worth 60 billion. Try again, 60 billion, and
Wow.
their physical assets are worth 120 billion. So a third of their value is in their data. And so they're shifting to being like a service provider. So rather than thinking of themselves as road builders, they now see themselves as service providers, and they're actually Project 13 adopters, and on the Smart Motorways program, and things like sort of just procuring to say we need to get from A to B, rather than saying we want you to build a road here. You just say we want to get from there to there. So that's a massive shift in mindset, and it's going to take a while. I'm not saying they've done it overnight, but it's that understanding that the information is as valuable as the actual physical assets. So that's a massive example that springs to mind.
That's really good. And is that case study, can people get that through Project 13? I know, is it written up somewhere? Yeah,
they were writing it up. It's an organization called AMNUT, AMNUT, worked with National Highways, and I know they were writing it up. You can sort of find it, references to it. The best thing would be actually is probably if you Google Davin Crowley-Sweet is the chief data officer, and he did an interview with Forbes magazine. So the easiest way is to probably put in Forbes, Davin Crowley-Sweet, National Highways, and then in that article comes up. But I know they were rating it up as a case study, so I don't know if that's publicly available yet.
I'll add whatever link is appropriate, and I know Devon as well, so that'd be great. Thank you. I mean, but it's them tangible examples. Again, it's might seem obvious, but people talking about data for data's sake, and again, you don't, but there's lots of people that do. They quite like data. I used to be one of them, but again, it's you can have infinite amounts of data, but what do you do with it? And again, this is obviously the persistent theme that's coming out. It's a means to an end, and we use the word enablement. And I think there's a way to go, isn't it? What do you see as the next sort of big thing, next big wave? It was sort of BIM for some people, then now obviously now it's digital twin. Is there another trend? Again, bear in mind this is for people that maybe aren't as close to these things. Is there another trend or activity ongoing that people should look for?
No, I think it is the connecting up of the digital twins, and that link to the information and data. So I think they're already new. Like, I don't think that's out there. So I don't think people either haven't heard digital twins, or if they have, I don't think that they get the link to that they're sitting on top of information and data, and if you don't get that flow right, you won't be able to have digital twins. But then the next step, I would say, is cyber physical infrastructure. So that's an example of that would be connected to digital twins, but lots of other things as well, things like AI and Internet of Things, artificial intelligence and Internet of Things, things like that. That's where they all interconnect. So there's almost like another whole system of systems within cyber physical infrastructure. But if you want hot, if this is an exclusive interview here of my prediction of the future, if that's what you want,
what should we look for? I mean,
you can come back to this in a few years and see if I was right. So this is my prediction of the future. I think that at the moment, I said to you, there's that triangle, and I've talked about sort of delivering differently, the kind of the Project 13 approach, sort of outcome focused, and there's carbon and net zero focus, and there's sort of moving towards maybe a digital twin and digital transformation focus. And I think the future, sitting on top of that triangle of the future, I think is place-based decision making. So because Project 13 is kind of on its way there, and it sort of enables that, but there's no vehicles and funding and things set up at the moment for sort of real proper place-based decision making. But if you want those community level outcomes, I think that that's the future. And going back to that solution-driven thing, that's where you bring together the parties that are involved in finding the right solutions for that area. And that's what I think we're moving towards, and we need to accelerate moving towards. So place-based decision making. Above the net zero carbon one, I think, is circular economy. And so I think that we're not going to be able to achieve the things with net zero. I don't think we'll be able to reach net zero without circular economy, resilience, biodiversity loss, all of those sort of interconnected issues there. I think circular economy underpins them all. And then with the digital, it will be the cyber physical infrastructure. But again, as I say, it's the combination of those three things, not one of them. And in the middle where the people bit sits, I think at the moment we're into collaboration and integration. And I think in the future it will be kind of alignment and change. That's the bit, the glue bit in the middle, which is, and what do I mean by alignment? I mean that for things like a circular economy, we can't, even if every single person does their bit, that doesn't mean that we would reach net zero or we could have a circular economy. They need to be aligned. And also that it's the power of the system we've been talking about is stronger than the individual power. So it's really important for all the individuals to do it, but it is actually the overall alignment of all of those that will hit our objectives. So that those are my predictions of the future. Then we can come back and talk about it in a few years.
Okay, I'm frantically making notes here. I'll have to rewatch this. But so of course, place-based decision making is music to my ears, having a background originally in cartography and geographic information systems. So I would agree. Obviously, that again, that's just enabling that, but still, things on a map and visualization is part of that decision process often. We reached, so thank you very much for everything we talked about. We're coming towards the end. I know you've mentioned several sort of documents and websites of Project 13. Obviously, I'll link to that, but if we could just explicitly mention sort of the vision document that you're involved with and flourishing systems. I know you mentioned them and touched on them, but I think I'd be remiss if I don't explicitly ask you just to describe them, and then I'll link to them if you would. That'd be great.
Yeah, so that's actually been a journey, and we're actually working on a circular economy piece now as the next step from our vision. But the journey was flourishing systems, and that's Mark Enzer and Jennifer Schooling, that was about introducing this system of systems idea, but it was focused on infrastructure and it was on better outcomes for people. And then when we moved to doing our vision, and the reason we published our vision was because it was in the middle of COVID, and exactly what I just said about that alignment piece is that everybody was coming out with strategies and roadmaps and plans, and it just felt like there needed to be this overarching document. And so that's how our vision was born, and we it was by us and for us, and we got the built environment together and we all published it on the same day. So again, it was the first of its kind in that way, and that moved when we did the interviews. That moved from, no, it's not just about infrastructure, it's about the built environment, it's about all of it, and it's not just about people, it's about people and nature. So as that movement, still the systems kind of underpinning it, but the movement wider. And then circular economy, we're doing the interviews, and it's just moving people that step on, which is that we talked about a project should be an intervention on the overall system, and now it's going down to the next step and looking at the actual materials and resources that are involved in that project, and the fact that systems have got no life cycle, assets have got a life cycle, and minerals have got several life cycles, and then also the economic implications of that. So that's been the journey. So you can watch this space for the circular economy one, it's coming soon, but the flourishing systems and our vision for the built environment, they're both out there already.
Thank you, that's great, thanks for that. And of course I'll link to them. I think that concept of different life cycles, about the physicality, and you talked about different like material, but then also the data. And I know this is there's lots of often I like to think of fractals, it's like repeating patterns, and guess what, if you zoom in or you zoom out rather, things look that there's a similar pattern to when you zoom in. So but in that case, the life cycle is, so again, we've only got a few minutes there. What explicit sort of either industry websites or places, again, probably more for people new to these concepts, that you'd recommend they go to look for things? And
so there is, you've mentioned there is the Project 13 network, and that's where we've got like our own LinkedIn or Facebook, so it's an interactive online community for anyone who wants to deliver differently. It's not even just necessarily just Project 13. It's just like people that are interested in delivering differently. And as I said to you, that light on a hill that attracts those people that think differently. So they're all there, and there's over 2,500 members from across the world there, and all the resources are in there as well. And there's a function for chat. So it's, as I say, it's not just passive. You can get involved, and then the parallel, the sister for that is something called the Digital Twin Hub. As well, and we're sister. You can imagine they enable each other with their sister platforms, and that's the same thing. It's got about the same. It's got about over 2,500, but that's much more specific. You can imagine around digital twins. So anybody who wants to know more about digital twins or is working on them and wants to collaborate with others, it's like a collaboration space and things as well. So that's there's that one there as well.
Great, thank you. I literally could talk all day, but I think it's absolutely the key for me is to get people excited about the topic and then find them, point into the right direction where they can find more. And if people want to go to events, sorry, I'll just throw this in here because you'll know, are there any physical events you'd recommend or you go to?
Yeah, well, so Project 13 does events. Actually, they're online at the moment.
Okay.
And the Digital Twin Hub. But I'm just trying to think of any.
Or any verticals you go to? I know it might, just any you would go to, water sector. Is there anything you've been to recently that you thought?
Yeah, it's the other way around. There's so many. there are a lot.
Okay.
There's a lot of different things that at lots of different levels. But I mean, we haven't really talked about. We're linked in as well with like the World Economic Forum and the Global Infrastructure Hub, and there's things like the World Green Building Council as well, and actually also the UN has got a lot of things going on. So it might be good to at that level to just check out what they're doing, because I'm not sure how much that's on our radar, but they're doing. So we're working with them on all of these things I've mentioned, and we're working with them, and what they're doing is creating a global network, so of people who are interested in doing these things differently.
So of course I was wrapping up, but now you've mentioned it, I'm going to have to ask you the World Economic Forum, just briefly, because I know you're involved, what you're doing, and I know you touched on it, but just a little bit more, because that's exciting.
So there's lots of different parts of the World Economic Forum, and so they are an actual partner in Project 13. So they did identify Project 13 as global best practice, and we've been doing a panel series with them. We're on the third phase of that. We've been myth busting. So this time we've been saying saying exactly things like you just said about value. Our next one is about, can you actually get the best from outcomes and values, or should be competition? And then I'm also working with them. They've got I can't think what the title is, but a global digital twin cities something.
I'll link to it. I'll look it up and link to it. So that's fine.
And another thing is Infrastructure 4.0. We published a report. That's a fantastic report. I'll give you a link to that as well. That was a really good report, actually. So but there's lots of different parts of WEF. There's also a circular economy part of WEF as well. So they've got lots. So it's worth looking them up. They've got a lot going on.
So I'll add the links. I think that sort of paradoxically, sort of a challenge for some people new to these topics or on the periphery is that there is a lot going on, which is good, but at the same time that's why it'd be great if we can link to some of the documents out there. And often, even just quickly, because this is not about you, it's not about me. I mean, this is about you. But just at a conference last year, someone mentioned, the BIM. All the BIM government stuff has dried up, and I pointed out the information management mandate in the transforming infrastructure performance. Again, there are some things, if you know, if you don't know, you don't know. So if you think of anything else, I'll link to it. But we've covered a lot today, so thank you very much for your time. I could absolutely talk all day, but I won't. I'll let you go. Thank you again for your insights. Thank you for your predicting the future for me. I'll put some bets on, but thank you, and I'll formally close here. Great. Thanks again, Melissa Zanocco OBE. Thanks for your time.
Well, thank you.